Well guys, the US Open is over, and this is going to be the recap for my 2022 One Bass US Open event out on Lake Mohave. The fishing was tough, practice was tough, the tournament was tough, everything was tough. Guys absolutely smashed them out there, had some big weights, but even those guys would tell you that the fishing was pretty tough overall. We're gonna walk through practice all the way through the event and talk about different things that I could have done different, things that I think I did right, and this is something that you guys are gonna be able to learn a ton of information from, how to go about practice, how to fish Lake Mohave in particular, but I think there's a lot of value that's gonna come out of this video, so stay tuned. And guys, as always, all my Pro-Am events this year were brought to you guys by GCI Outdoor, 6th Sense Fishing, Waterland Fishing Optics, and Dual Molds. Without those companies, I wouldn't have been able to get out on the water, create this content for you guys, fish these events, and just learn a ton more about fishing that I can bring to you guys through these videos. So please head down to the description, check out the different discount codes and affiliate links I have to their websites, and please use those so that way they know that I sent you and I can get credit for those sales, so that way I can continue to bring this content to you guys. So in any event, tournament practice is always tough, especially on day one. You have no idea what to expect, you have no idea what's going out on the lakes, you just have to go fishing and just figure things out. I ended up running some water, catching some small fish on drop shot, caught a small fish on a buzzbait, but overall I think I might have caught one keeper, maybe 0 keepers on day one. But I started figuring out some colors that were getting bit, some areas that I could get bit, seeing what kind of cuts had grass, was there any bait, was the bluegill up shallow, different things like that I was able to key in on that helped me go into day 2. So for the second day of practice, I decided to go to a completely different part of the lake, and I think I ended up catching 1 or 2 keepers on day 2 of practice, but overall it was pretty tough. I don't remember anything off the top of my head that jumped out that was game-changing or anything like that, but my buddy Justin did show up and kind of helped me out a little bit to key in on some things that he found way up the lake, and it kind of helped me dial some things in that I could look for going into day 3. So my third day of practice is when I started really feeling like I figured something out. I found some fish, I found some bites, I was able to catch some fish off the forward-facing sonar, which I knew after the first couple days of practice was definitely going to be a factor for this tournament. So on day 3, I pull up, I'm in the main bowl of the lake, which ended up being a very productive area of the lake for a lot of people, and I pull up on this big giant point with a steep kind of ledge going in, and this is way offshore, guys, and I had the Carolina rig in my hand, which isn't typically what I would throw on those fish that I'm using forward-facing sonar with, but I cast that Carolina rig out, I see the fish swim over, eat the Carolina rig, and I ended up catching it. It was one of the biggest fish I caught in practice. It was a smallmouth that was probably pushing 3-4 pounds. It was definitely one of the ones you want to bring into weigh-in on tournament day, so I felt like I had something figured out, felt like I could go out in the tournament and do some of that and maybe get a couple bites. So later on day 3 of practice, I found another general area of the lake that had a lot of activity. There was bait everywhere, there were stripers busting bait, and I started getting some bites up shallow. I got some bites off of a deeper point, and I just felt like the combination of what I found on the offshore area and the bowl area of the lake, and then what I found where those stripers were busting, there was bait everywhere. I found some cuts with some good grass, and I felt like I had, a solid couple areas that were big enough that I could fish them, multiple times throughout the tournament. And it wasn't spot specific necessarily, so I felt like I could just run different points, run some of these different cuts with good grass, and figure out how to catch these fish. Whether I was able to figure out in the tournament or in practice or not, I wasn't sure, but I knew that the life was there, so that meant the fish should be there, so I'd be able to kind of game plan and figure things out as the days went on. So then going into day 4 of practice, I was trying to dial in that area I found at the end of day 3. I wanted to go in there in the morning to see if I could get a topwater bite in some of that good grass that I found, maybe get some big largemouth that are living in that grass where there's bait, where there's bluegill. There's a lot of life and activity in there, so I wanted to go in there, try to figure out if I could get some bites in the morning, but that didn't pan out for me. But I still had confidence in those areas because everything looked right. The life was there, the bluegill were there, the bait was there, there were fish breaking, there was bait way out off the points, there were smallmouth on those points, so it had everything that it needed to have in order to hold some fish. So that was going to be my starting area. Whether I fished those points or whether I fished those cuts, it didn't really matter. I just had to kind of wait to see what my boat draw was and then head to that area of the lake and just see what was available and start fishing come tournament time. So going into the tournament, I was a little concerned, I'm not gonna lie. I wasn't sure what to expect. I wasn't sure if I was gonna be able to catch them, but at the same time I wasn't sure if I found some areas with some fish, and when I hunkered down and really fished it, that I'd end up getting some quality bites and have a chance at a decent bag. So I go out to my first few areas and I'm putting my trolling motor down and my forward facing sonar is not working. For whatever reason, it wasn't sensing that it was in the water, so it would never turn itself on. That's pretty common for all these transducers with the forward facing sonar because you don't want them to overheat when they're out of the water. So they basically protect themselves, and then once they're in the water, then they turn on. I was intending to fish with that, look for those fish and catch them. They weren't stacked up anywhere for me to be able to blind cast and just sit on a point and catch them. It wasn't that kind of fishing. So that really made the day difficult. And we ended up catching some small fish, but literally guys, I blanked on day one. I did not bring in any fish. My co-angler didn't bring in any fish. We had 0 fish for the day. It was a really, really tough day and a struggle. So day 2 rolls around and I'm pretty defeated. I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty defeated with how day 1 went. I never would have expected to 0 on day 1. I definitely didn't think I was gonna 0, but I knew that there was a chance that I was gonna struggle. So on day 2, I ran completely different water. We hit up one of the spots that I had caught a good fish in practice, and we're drop shotting, and my co-angler ends up being able to catch a really good smallmouth. It was probably 3-4 pounds, something like that, a really good smallmouth, and we're off to a good start. It was first thing in the morning, we're off to a good start. Maybe we're gonna be able to piece something together. So I ran to a completely different area of the lake, ran a bunch of different new water, almost didn't fish anything that was the same on day 2 that I did on day 1, ran new water for practice, and things just weren't coming together. I had a really late weigh-in on day 2, so I was like trying to stay optimistic, trying to stay positive, and just kept fishing and kept fishing and kept fishing. Towards the end of the day, I started running some more new water. It was close to some stuff that I fished in practice, some areas where I got bites, and literally by 4:30, I end up catching a largemouth on a dual mulch jig that I make. We ended up bringing 2 fish to the scales on day 2, but unfortunately that was 570, I think it was, and definitely not what you want for the second day of the tournament. It was definitely an improvement from day 1, but it was definitely not something that I would hope for coming in to weigh in. One thing that I did not realize going into day 3 is who my co-angler was. So I get a phone call, or I call my co-angler and we're talking, and I said, hey, how'd you do today? And he's like, oh, we had 19 pounds. I'm like, hey, that's pretty good. How'd you do on day 1? He's like, oh, I had 11. And I was like, man, what place are you in? He's like, oh, I'm in second place on the co-angler side, so you know, I'm really looking to have a good day. So the pressure was on for sure going into the final day of the tournament. So I explained to him how tough the fishing had been for me, some of the struggles that I was having, that we had a couple fish the day before, and that we were gonna do whatever we could to try to catch some fish to keep him in the hunt and hopefully have a good day, and then he could win this thing. He was in second place. He was right there, he was right in the mix to get a good check to win this tournament on the co-angler side. So all in all, the final day of the tournament ended up being a success. We were able to catch a limit. He ended up, I think, catching 3 out of the 5. He was throwing a drop shot all day. I was mixing it up, and for whatever reason, I could not get bit on a drop shot to save my life. So I ended up catching my 2 fish that I brought into the scales on a Carolina rig, and we ended up having, I think, around 12 pounds or something like that, and it was good enough to keep him in the top 10, to keep him in the top 5, and he ended up finishing 4th in the tournament. So not exactly what we wanted to get him to the win, or at least to stay in second place, but we brought in enough in order for him to have a really good event and get that 4th place finish. So some key takeaways that I learned from this tournament is you can never fish too far away from the bank as long as the depth isn't crazy. These fish were out there because the bait was out there. There was some wood in certain areas. It wasn't like they were just sitting on a rock pile or anything like that. So the takeaway is, don't be afraid to go way out off the bank and check that stuff. Some of those fish are gonna be out there. That's probably what they're doing all summer long out there at Lake Mohave. Another takeaway for me from this tournament was, once my electronics kind of failed me, I should have just abandoned that altogether and just went to the areas where I had the most bites in practice. If I would have done that, I probably would have been able to come close to cashing a check, because that's basically what I did on day 3 of the tournament when I was really needing to catch that limit for my co-angler to have a good tournament. I went to the areas where I had the most bites. There was a lot of grass in the areas, and I got a bunch of bites. And we were able to put together 5 fish and have a halfway decent limit to keep my co-angler in the hunt. And he actually led the tournament for a while on day 3, and then some late bags came in with some of the guys that finished in the top 10, bumped him down a couple spots where he finished in 4th. But sometimes you have to just call that audible, and you have to just go to the areas where you got the most bit. It may not be your biggest fish, but I should have spent more time there, especially when my forward sonar wasn't gonna allow me to fish how I really wanted to try to really make it run and having a really good tournament. But I really think that if I would have just went to the areas where I had the most bites, I probably could have caught 12 to 14 to 15 pounds a day there, and that would have put me in check range. These tournaments teach you so much. Fishing against the best out there, fishing against the fish, fishing in conditions that aren't ideal, all those different things are what makes you a better fisherman. So even though this event wasn't as good as I wanted to, I mean, I finished 116th, guys, so it's not a good finish, but I learned a ton. I learned a lot about Lake Mohave, I learned about practice, and I learned about what decisions I should have made in practice, and that's what's key for these events, because it's a bummer, I want to do well, but the main thing is what can I take away from that event and what can I do to get better for the next one. And special thanks to GCI Outdoor, 6th Sense Fishing, Waterland Fishing Optics, and Duables for making these events possible. Make sure to go down in the description of today's video and check out the different affiliate links and discount codes so you guys can go support those companies. Please go there and check out their products if you're not familiar with them. If you have any questions about them, feel free to message me and I will let you know all about them. And I'll see you guys next time. See ya.